16. Sweetly, Lord, have we heard thee calling, come, follow me. And we see where thy footprints falling, lead us to thee. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus wherever they go. Though they lead o'er the cold dark mountains, seeking his sheep, or along by Solomon's fountain, helping the weak. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus wherever they go. If they lead through the temple, holy, preaching the word, or in both and lowly, serving the Lord. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus wherever they go. By and by through the shining portals, turning our feet, we shall walk with the glad immortals that golden street. Footprints of Jesus that make the pathway glow. We will follow the steps of Jesus wherever they go. Song for the lesson tonight will be page 452. 452. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages let his presence ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior, standing. I'm standing on the promises of God, standing on the promises that cannot fail. When the house storms and doubt and fear assail, by the living word of God I shall prevail, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior, standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fall. Listening every moment to the Spirit's call. All in all, standing on promises of God. Standing, standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God.
Can't run out of voice on that one. The song back from lesson page 936, 936, Brother Howard.
Good evening. So when you think of the book of Revelation, when did you expect all of the book to take place? When people hear the word revelation and speaking to the Bible, the thought is this is all futuristic. Some of it is looking at and revealing this vision is explaining things that have happened. The fulfillment of the entirety and things that are about to happen. There's this one chapter in here that is kind of looking at what had happened and not what was going to happen, so that you can understand the point of the Christian is going to be protected and will be saved in the end. And so some things that we're going to look at tonight are more of an explanation that had happened. Okay? And so when we look at it, we want to think about this. This is chapter 12. There's a conflict between God and Satan, and someone would likely say, well, there's always been conflict with God and Satan. But there's a time when that conflict would reach a particular point, and then later on it'll reach a final end. In Revelation 12, verses 1 and 2, talk about the woman and her child. Notice now, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. Okay? First of all, this woman is not married. The child is in reference to the Messiah. Now, I want you to know the description. She was clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. All week I kept thinking, where is that language? Where have I seen that before? Something, a reference to the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. Genesis chapter 37. Starting verse 5, it speaks of Joseph's dream. Joseph had a dream and told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There were binding shields in the field, and behold, my sheep also rose and also stood upright. Indeed, your sheep stood all around and bowed down to my sheep. And his brother said, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now this is the first dream it tells about. Both of his dreams are pertaining to him going to be in Egypt and become a ruler. Now notice this one. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, but this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his fathers rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed bow down to the earth before you? Now this pertains to Joseph again and Egypt. But I want you to look at the language. Who does Jacob determine the son to be?
Yeah.
Who does he determine the moon to be?
Joseph's mother.
By this time, Rebecca is dead, so Rachel is dead. He's referring to Leah. But as far as her being the mother that's left to partake of. And then the 11 stars, of course, were his 11 brothers. So if you have 12 stars, how about 12 brothers? Who would the son be? Still Jacob. Looking at Revelation. The moon would be more in reference to Rachel, Leah, and the concubines that brought forth those 12 sons. Those 12 tribes of Israel. So now, if this woman is adorned with the sun, the moon, and the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 stars, who is she? Okay, the nation of Israel. That's really what it's referring to. See, the nation of Israel, we go through the Old Testament, and once we get to Moses, everything is about the nation of Israel bringing forth the Messiah. And the child is definitely the Messiah. We'll see that in the reading. Now, I want you to think about this. What did the devil do all through the history of Israel? Try to interrupt that lineage. All the way through, he tried to stop it. He tried to interrupt it. And so definitely when that child is born, he wants to kill it. You go to the next two verses, the dragon. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Okay? If I can't stop it from being born, how about I devour it when it's born? Go back, and I don't know why I have Matthew 16. This is Matthew 2. When the wise men went to Herod and sought to know where the child was to be born, this is what, when they didn't return to him, it tells us that Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. See the point there where it says ready to devour the child? As much as God was putting people in place where he wanted them, the devil was trying to put people in place when he started realizing as things were fulfilled when they were, to destroy. And he tried to destroy them. So then we get to chapter 12 and verses 4 and 6. She bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she was a place prepared by God, and they should feed her there for 1,260. Okay? Now notice this point. Now it has shifted not just from the birth, but from the crucifixion and the resurrection. That's when Jesus ascended to God and his throne. Now, why would the devil want to destroy the woman now? Her job's done, so to speak, right? Not quite. Let's go back to Psalm chapter 2. I will declare the decree. The Son has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask for me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Psalm 2 is a prophecy of Christ. In Galatians 4, verse 4 and 5, we read, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that he might receive the adoption as sons. That we. These points, when we look at them there, they show the fulfillment that has already taken place in Revelation of what you're reading in chapter 12. It's kind of the backstory. You ever watch a movie and it starts out and you're okay, and it's going here, and then suddenly they stop and go back and give you the backstory that's behind that? That's what God is doing here in Revelation. He's gotten John to a point and he gives him the backstory. Because what's the idea we have concerning the devil and God? Or the devil being in the presence of God?
He's trying to bring our thoughts before God and Jesus.
Well, that's one thing that he does, but we always have this idea that the devil was cast out as soon as he sinned. That's what we think. And this is when the war in heaven started, not when he sinned, but after the death of Christ or resurrection. Notice in verse 7, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So that the great dragon was cast out, the servant of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. I want to show you something. First of all, let's look at this point that both Jude and Peter make. In chapter 1, verse 9, it tells you that Michael, the archangel, the one we just read about, and contending with the devil, when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring him a reviling accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke you. And Michael didn't take any authority on his own. He used the Lord's authority to rebuke the devil. And that's back in the time of the death of Moses. Now, in 2 Peter 2, verse 49, Peter tells us this point concerning judgment. For if God did not spare the angels of sin, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them example to those who actually would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing here their lawless deeds. I have a whole sermon on that. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. So in these 2 scriptures, we show that God still has authority over them, and at one point has reserved them to judgment, has bound them. So the devil is able to go back and forth, or no longer able to go back and forth, but only on the earth. Look at Job chapter 1. Verse 6, 7. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it. Where is Satan talking to God at? In heaven. Now look at chapter 2, verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it. What did Satan try to do in those two chapters? What was his purpose in coming before the Lord? Which man? Job. This is particular. He's coming to try and, because this first one says, you built a hedge around Job. So he gets the hedge removed. Then he wants to inflict more upon Job, and God says, you can do anything but take his life. That tells us two things. Satan can't do anything without the Lord's permission. The other thing is, devil's not all-knowing. God knew Job would not sin in chapter 1. God knew that Job would not sin in chapter 2. Satan assumed that if he could do the same things he do the other, that he would curse God and die. And God knew that he wouldn't. So here's the thing about we should understand. God allowed Satan to go to and fro from the earth and heaven so that he could control him with what information he gave him. Because really, who killed the Messiah? In a sense, we did, but who actually put that forth? He died for our sins, and we all have a part in it. But who actually sought the death of the Messiah? Satan. And why?
He thought he crushed God's plan by doing it.
He thought with the death of the Messiah, redemption was done. He never understood that by killing him, he actually fulfilled God's plan. And that's important in this chapter in Revelation. Now, verse 10 and 12 tells us, and this is after the devil has been cast out. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren, there's what Darrell talked about, he's always accusing, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you having a great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Here is a realization. You ever thought that you're trying to accomplish something and you're doing all you can trying to do it, and then there comes a point that you say, I'm not going to be able to do this? She said, every day in my college homework, I kind of can be sentimental to that part, some of it. That's what life does to it. But here is a reality. See, the devil thought right up until the resurrection of Christ, right up until this moment, he could overcome God. He could cost all men, their souls. But once the resurrection happened, no more. So, kind of like Hitler, when Hitler realized the tide was turning, rather than surrender, he started ordering the killing of more people. They started killing POWs. They didn't even make them POWs. They just catch them and do things like that. I'm going to kill as many as I can. That's what Satan realized. Okay, I've lost. I'm going to hell. I'm going to take as many as I can with me. That's what it's talking about. He's come down having great wrath. He's angry. And why is he angry? Because not only did he lose, he helped himself lose. If he had ever known that the death of Christ would fulfill redemption, he would have did all he could to protect him. So then it tells us the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of this world have become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. A lot of people have a problem. They're looking for a world kingdom. You go back to Matthew chapter 5 and the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek. Some translations, humble, for they shall inherit the earth. Who struggles with life? Really struggles with life? Those that aren't humble. Those that are always trying to overcome everything. Trying to make sure this life is what they want. But what do the humble do? The humble that Jesus is talking about are those that humbly submit themselves to the Lord. And though it is not a promise that we will own the earth, but we will be able to accept it with contentment and be able to live our lives understanding it. Here's the question. Every world leader thinks they are in charge of their kingdom. Who's really in charge? That's what he's talking about here. They're all going to answer to me. What did he tell Nebuchadnezzar? Or maybe what did Nebuchadnezzar finally conclude? I think it's both in that chapter 4 of Daniel. That God rules in the kingdoms of men and gives them to whom he chooses. And they all are for his purpose. Notice this point. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. The devil has great wrath, and he is coming to persecute. You get to Matthew 10, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Who loves son or daughter more than me, he is not worthy of me. Remember that point that we read? That the one, they have saved their life. They did not love their lives to the death. This is what Jesus is talking about. He who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. A lot of times we talk about the context of the scripture of it written. What about the context of the time in which it was written? Is that important? Here it does. Because the cross, what did that signify to the people of that time. When it says, take up your cross and follow me, what did the cross signify to them? Death. Death. Suffering, punishment, all resulting in death. That was part of the punishment, was making them carry their own cross to where it was to be erected. So unless you're willing to put to death your life and live in me, you're not worthy of me. Not physically put to death, but that thought, it's no longer mine. We don't like slavery. Paul tells us in chapter 6 we're in bondage either to Christ of Romans or we're in bondage to sin. How do you like those out? No matter what you do, you're a slave. So choose your master wisely. That's what Jesus is talking about. We're going to serve one or the other. If we save our life, we'll lose it. Notice this point concerning those that overcame. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Victory is in the Lord. 1 John 5, 3 and 4, for this love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. I don't know if it's in this book or not, but there is a song that says, faith is the victory. Faith. These people that it described had not lost their faith. Now we get back to this woman and the persecution. Revelation 12, 13, 17. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Okay, so initially we looked at the woman as who? Nation of Israel. Why would you continue to persecute the nation of Israel? I want you to keep that thought in your mind. But the woman who was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and a half time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed out water of his mouth like a flood at the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war, and notice it, with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So initially she is the nation of Israel looking at bringing forth the child. Now who's the rest of her offspring? Christians. Christians. Sometimes we forget about that. That nation of Israel, old, not only brought forth the Messiah, it brought forth faithful people who became who? Not Christians. I'm looking for another thing. Where do you find Christians? The church. Who were the first Christians? Jews, Israelites. And they brought forth the church. And the church is those who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Remember when we read in one of the letters, those who say they are Jews but are not, Christ saying that? What was the true Jew to do? Keep the commandments of God. If they rejected his Christ, were they not all still Jews? Only in nature. But they weren't a Jew in spirit. The true Jews in spirit would keep the testimony, wouldn't reject the Christ. So when he says they say they're Jews but are not, it's not they're not physically Jews, it's that they're not spiritually Jews. They're not part of his kingdom. Matthew 16:18, Simon Peter answered and said, "You are Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." We made the statement, I believe it was last week, in this verse, speaking of it, it doesn't say that the devil and his angels won't make war against the church, just that it will not prevail. We'll go to Acts chapter 8. This is concerning the death of Stephen. Now Saul was consenting to his death. At that time, a great persecution arose against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. Therefore, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. The question is, how long was this after the birth of Christ, or after the death of Christ and his resurrection? We really don't know. We estimate 10 to 20 years. So what happened to the church when it was in Jerusalem those 10 to 20 years? Even if you just say 10 years. Notice this part here. I believe it. Wait a minute. I'm trying to find it now. I've lost it. Okay. This is where the casting, I've lost it. I'm looking for it. There's that point that he makes that he will only be able to. Okay, this is where I'm looking for. Notice it's given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to a place where she is nourished for a time and a half time from the presence of the serpent. Other than some individual skirmishes between the apostles and the council, from Acts chapter 2 to the death of Stephen, which we estimate being that 10 years, there was no real persecution of the church. This was that preserving of time that God gave for the church to grow. How many were saved at Pentecost? 3,000. Later, we read of 5,000 obeying the gospel. Then we read of priests and Pharisees obeying the gospel. The church was growing in that time until the persecution was to come. It was after that that he began his persecution. What happened when the persecution started? They were scattered. What did they do? They took the message everywhere. That's the point that made everything happen. Okay, let's think about this. You have a child. How long do you try and nurture and raise that child before you just let it go out the door? You try till it's ready, but how long? Average in our society is 18 years. 18 years. God was nourishing his child, the church, until it was ready to go forth, till the earth was ready to receive it. It's interesting, you have Philip immediately going to Samaria in this chapter. It would seem as though there were those in Syria and other places, because Paul is going to Damascus to try to persecute them in chapter 9. And then chapter 10, you have Peter preaching to Cornelius. Now you've included the Gentiles. Interesting enough, what was Cornelius doing? He was praying, trying to serve God. And guess what happened? When Peter went there and preached to him and carried all those people, as soon as Peter got back to Jerusalem, what happened? Anyone remember? I see some heads nodding. He got called in on the carpet. And he was about to get rebuked. He had to explain himself. What happened after he got done explaining himself?
They agreed that it was right to bring in the Gentiles.
He agreed that they were to bring in the Gentiles. They agreed. You think that would have happened the day after Pentecost? No, that's what God was doing, getting things like that ready. Perhaps that's why he waited till chapter 9 to convince Saul. Because Saul himself had to get ready. Notice here, John chapter 1, speaking of Jesus. But as many as received him, to him he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. In chapter 5 of 1 John, we read, whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone who loves him who beget also loves him who is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. So now the devil is making war against the rest of her children, which includes even us. So hell takes a starting point of when the devil is cast out and the result of what he is doing now. And that what he was doing to them at that time. You ever need to know that this is the work of the devil and not God? We do every day. How many times have we asked God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why did you do this? How many people blame God for everything? The Christian has to understand, because of free will, the devil himself has to be allowed to do things to bring about God's plan. And we have to have that free will. Other people have to have that free will. And so when they listen to the devil, how are they going to exercise their free will? In trying to destroy us. And so even at that time, God said, you Christians need to understand The persecution is not from me, it's from the devil. But in the end, you can overcome. Your faith will help you overcome. But don't love your life and try to save it, or you'll lose it. Like Ron's comment this morning, that understand that when we die, I believe, I may be paraphrasing, but understand that we don't want to lose our life in death. Something along those lines. We won't want to be able to be. And that's the promise of Revelation. And y'all gonna keep hearing me reiterate that through every chapter. Because in every chapter, there's a little bit of reiteration of that by God. And that's our promise, that's our hope. Invitation song.
Or it's coming on.
Yeah, here we go. That's the promise of Revelation. Let's stand and sing.
I wandered far away from God. Now I'm coming home. The paths of sin too long I've trod. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home. Coming home, never more to roam. Open wide thine arms above. Lord, I'm coming home.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Is there anyone that needs